Hi, Miss Patterson. Long-awaited topics of interest presentation. So I ended up going with researching how playing an instrument benefits your brain because I feel like it's just something we always hear, like playing an instrument is so good for you, and it's good to start at a young age and all this different stuff. But I feel like I never actually knew why, so that's why I decided to research this. Okay, so I'm going to start off with this video. It's about 5 minutes long.
Did you know that every time musicians pick up their instruments, there are fireworks going off all over their brain? On the outside, they may look calm and focused, reading the music and making the precise and practiced movements required. But inside their brains, there's a party going on. How do we know this? Well, in the last few decades, neuroscientists have made enormous breakthroughs in understanding how our brains work by monitoring them in real time with instruments like fMRI and PET scanners. When people are hooked up to these machines, tasks such as reading or doing math problems each have corresponding areas of the brain where activity can be observed. But when researchers got the participants to listen to music, they saw fireworks. Multiple areas of their brains were lighting up at once as they processed the sound, took it apart to understand elements like melody and rhythm, and then put it all back together into unified musical experience. And our brains do all this work in the split second between when we first hear the music and when our foot starts to tap along. But when scientists turn from observing the brains of music listeners to those of musicians, the little backyard fireworks became a jubilee. It turns out that while listening to music engages the brain in some pretty interesting activities, playing music is the brain's equivalent of a full-body workout. The neuroscientists saw multiple areas of the brain light up, simultaneously processing different information in intricate, interrelated, and astonishingly fast sequences. But what is it about making music that sets the brain alight? The research is still fairly new, but neuroscientists have a pretty good idea. Playing a musical instrument engages practically every area of the brain at once, especially the visual, auditory, and motor cortices. And as with any other workout, disciplined, structured practice in playing music strengthens those brain functions, allowing us to apply that strength to other activities. The most obvious difference between listening to music and playing it is that the latter requires fine motor skills, which are controlled in both hemispheres of the brain. It also combines the linguistic and mathematical precision in which the left hemisphere is more involved, with the novel and creative content that the right excels in. For these reasons, playing music has been found to increase the volume and activity in the brain's corpus callosum, the bridge between the two hemispheres, allowing messages to get across the brain faster and through more diverse routes. This may allow musicians to solve problems more effectively and creatively in both academic and social settings. Because making music also involves crafting and understanding its emotional content and message, musicians often have higher levels of executive function, a category of interlinked tasks that includes planning, strategizing, and attention to detail, and requires simultaneous analysis of both cognitive and emotional aspects. This ability also has an impact on how our memory systems work. And indeed, musicians exhibit enhanced memory functions, creating, storing, and retrieving memories more quickly and efficiently. Studies have found that musicians appear to use their highly connected brains to give each memory multiple tags, such as a conceptual tag, an emotional tag, an audio tag, and a contextual tag, like a good internet search engine. So how do we know that all these benefits are unique to music, as opposed to, say, sports or painting? Or could it be that people who go into music were already smarter to begin with? Neuroscientists have explored these issues, but so far they have found that the artistic and aesthetic aspects of learning to play a musical instrument are different from any other activity studied, including other arts. And several randomized studies of participants who showed the same levels of cognitive function and neural processing at the start found that those who were exposed to a period of music learning showed enhancement in multiple brain areas compared to the others. This recent research about the mental benefits of playing music has advanced our understanding of mental function, revealing the inner rhythms and complex interplay that make up the amazing orchestra of our brain.
Alright, I hope that was interesting. I think a really important part of the video was, or kind of a key takeaway to summarize it, would be that playing music is like a full body workout for the brain. So I wanted to touch more on the corpus callosum. So essentially, as you can see in this image here, the corpus callosum is basically the bridge that allows the two sides of the brain to communicate with each other, which is exactly what playing music helps strengthen, is that those the communication between both sides of the brain. And then under here, the video kind of touched on it briefly, but I have this chart to explain kind of what each side of the brain is generally associated with. So the left side is more connected to logic and sequencing, and it's more mathematical. And then the right side is more creative and intuitive, and kind of more in touch with imagination. So this first bullet here talks about increased gray matter volume in musicians, which I will go into in the next slide. But essentially when musicians are constantly practicing things like listening and timing, movement, and coordination, these brain regions that I have listed out here become more developed. And then, oh wait, I forgot to say this. Oh my god, sorry. Going back to both sides of the brain, playing music requires both sides at once, which is why, again, going back to the corpus callosum, which is why this gets strengthened so much when playing music. Because obviously reading sheet music involves sequencing and logic, and you also have to interpret rhythm and expression, which involves creativity and timing. So because musicians constantly use both hemispheres together, the corpus callosum becomes stronger and more developed. And then to kind of end off this slide about this second bullet point, it's basically saying that the duration of musical training correlates with structural changes in white matter tracts, because basically the longer someone practices music, the stronger these communication pathways become. Alright, so as I said before, I'm going to get into kind of what gray matter is. So, yeah, essentially gray matter is a type of brain and spinal cord tissue that helps you think, remember, and make decisions. And it also plays a really big role in movement and processing sensory information, like what you see and feel. So it's essentially the part of the brain involved in processing information. And then this image on the right here is a cross-section of the brain, and the darker outer layer is the gray matter, which forms the cortex, which is essentially the wrinkled outside part of your brain. And the lighter inside areas are mostly white matter, which is more involved in communication between different brain regions. And then this note down here is actually really important, because the wrinkles are actually really important because they increase surface area, and more folds allow more brain tissue to fit inside the skull, which increases processing ability and just allows for more overall complex thinking. And then also the labeled regions in the image here, like the hippocampus and, oh my god, okay, I'm definitely going to butcher this pronunciation. Basal ganglia? Oh my god, I'm sorry if I said that so wrong. The labeled regions in the image I was saying are examples of areas involved in memory, learning, and movement. And these are all skills that musicians constantly use while practicing. And then these bullet points here explain kind of what gray matter contains. So cell bodies are the main parts of nerve cells. Dendrites receive messages from other cells, and then short axons and endings send messages to other cells, which is really important for communication throughout the nervous system. So big idea is musicians have more gray matter than the average person. Alright, and then this diagram is showing how signals move through the spinal cord during a reflex, because as we can see here, the gray matter is also tissue found in the spinal cord, not just in the brain. So the blue pathway starts with the sensory neuron, which, one sec, Eva. Apologies. As I was saying, the blue pathway starts with the sensory neuron, which detects a stimulus, like touching something hot, for example, and then that signal travels into the spinal cord. And then the signal reaches this relay neuron, which is also called an interneuron, and that is located in the gray matter of the spinal cord. And the interneuron processes the information really quickly and passes the signal to the motor neuron. And the motor neuron then sends a response to your muscle, so you pull your hand away. And then also this diagram compares gray matter with white matter. So white matter contains mostly bundles of myelinated axons, which help signals travel quickly. And then gray matter contains neuron cell bodies and relay neurons where processing actually happens. And I included this slide because playing music also relies on super fast communication between sensory neurons, motor neurons, and processing centers in the brain and spinal cord. So when musicians practice repeatedly, these pathways become essentially more efficient. Alright, and then connection to biology. So the image on the right is showing a synapsis, which is the tiny gap between neurons where communication happens. And neurotransmitters are released from one neuron and bind to receptors on the next neuron to pass the signal along. And this is important because every movement involved in playing music depends on neuron communication like this. And your brain has to send signals extremely quickly between neurons in order to coordinate finger movement, timing, and then just like sound processing. And these bullet points on the left here describe a reflex arc, which is a really good example of nervous system communication and negative feedback. So first, a stimulus triggers a sensory signal, and then neurons in the spinal cord process the information. And then after that, a motor response happens. So, for example, like pulling your hand away from something hot. And then once the danger is removed, the pain signal decreases, so the feedback loop closes. And music practice strengthens these same communication pathways because musicians constantly repeat coordinated sensory and motor actions over and over again. Alright, and then these are just some overall kind of transferable skills, like tangible skills that playing music has on other people. So the video kind of touched on it, but like fine motor skills, memory is a really big one. Even like social skills, which I find really interesting. Like listening skills and reading skills, temporal processing, general IQ, and yeah, these are kind of some of the factors that can affect the degree to how, I guess, significant these skills are on the person, if that makes sense.